The first thing my son asked on Mother's Day wasn't how I felt, it was whether I'd received the $5,000 he swore he'd been sending. His hands were full of bright tulips, but his eyes looked past me, like he was already halfway back to his office. I stood there in my faded house dress with flour on my wrist from the cornbread I'd baked, trying to make my voice sound normal. 5,000? I repeated, because surely I'd misheard. Mark is my only child. 40 years old. Successful in a way I still don't fully understand. New buildings, polished shoes, meetings that never end. And I'm June Holloway, 68, widowed, living in the same little place outside Columbus where he learned to ride a bike and where his father taught him to shake a man's hand like he meant it. I should have felt proud that day. I did, for a second. Then my stomach dropped, because for 8 months I'd been stretching cans of soup, counting coins for my medicine, and accepting grocery bags from church like they were gold. If $5,000 had been coming, where had it gone? And if it hadn't, who was lying to my boy? Paige walked in right then, like she'd been waiting for her cue. Silk blouse, perfect hair, perfume that filled my small living room as if it had the right to take up space. She kissed my cheek without touching me, then smiled at Mark the way a person smiles when they think the room belongs to them. Mark asked again, softer. Mom, Paige has been dropping it off, right? I just want you comfortable. I looked at him, my baby with a man's shoulders, and I heard myself say, sweetheart, the church pantry has been keeping me afloat. The quiet after that sentence was so sharp it felt like a pin pushed under my nail. Mark's face tightened. Paige's smile didn't fall, not fully. It just changed shape, the way a ribbon curls when you pull it too hard. Paige said, "Oh, June, you must have forgotten. I come by every month." Forgotten. Have you ever had someone talk about your mind like it's already gone, while you're standing right there listening? I could have argued. I could have cried. But a strange calm took my throat and held it steady. If you came, I said, then something happened to the money. Mark rubbed his temple, like he could smooth the problem away. It's probably a mix-up. I'll look into it. Paige touched his arm. A tiny gesture, possessive, almost protective, except it wasn't me she was protecting him from. They stayed less than an hour. Mark complimented my cornbread, barely ate. Paige walked through my house with her eyes, taking inventory of old photos and worn furniture, like she was measuring what I deserved. Then they left, and the tulip sat in a jar on the table like a bright accusation. That night I opened my little spiral notebook, the one I use for grocery lists and prayer requests. On a fresh page I wrote, "Find where it went." And under it, "Don't let them call you confused." In the morning I went to my bank. Not the sleek kind with glass walls, just a brick building with a flag out front and tellers who still look people in the eye. I asked for my account history, all deposits, all transfers. The young teller's name tag said Kendra. She typed, frowned, then turned the screen a little as if she felt bad showing me. "Mrs. Holloway," she said gently, "there's nothing like that here. No monthly deposits. No incoming transfers. The only growth was a small interest payment that wouldn't buy a carton of eggs." My hands went cold around my purse strap. For 8 months, I'd been living like a woman with no family, while my son believed he'd been taking care of me. On my way out, I sat in my car with the engine off and stared at the steering wheel until my eyes burned. What kind of mother tells her son his wife might be stealing? And what kind of mother stays silent when she knows something is wrong? I drove to church instead of home. St. Bridget's was quiet midweek, smelling of old wood and lemon cleaner. Pastor Ellison found me in the last pew. He's the kind of man who listens with his whole face. "June," he said, "you look like you're carrying a rock." "I might be," I whispered. "And I don't know yet who put it in my arms." He told me something I've never forgotten: truth doesn't need shouting. It needs steady feet. That afternoon I started keeping records the way I used to when I worked bookkeeping at the grocery co-op decades ago. Date. Time. Who said what? I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it because numbers don't flatter liars. Paige began appearing more often once she realized I'd asked questions. She'd show up with thoughtful things, fancy tea, candles, a scarf still smelling like department store air. Never cash. Never an envelope. Never a receipt. One Wednesday she arrived in a new white SUV that looked too clean to have ever carried groceries. She stood by my porch railing, tapping her nails against her phone. "June," she said, "Mark worries you're stressed. Stress makes memory worse." I smiled, slow and sweet. "My memory is fine enough to remember you've never handed me a dime." Her jaw tightened, just a flicker. Then she laughed like I'd told a harmless joke. "It must be the bank," she said. "Those places lose things. Do you know what doesn't get lost? A person's character." That evening, I called Mark's office line and asked, politely, to speak to whoever handled payroll and transfers. I didn't give a speech. I didn't accuse. I asked a simple question: are the monthly transfers going out? A man named Trevor, calm, careful, said, "Mrs. Holloway, I can't disclose much, but I can tell you the outgoing payments are consistent." My throat went dry. "To me?" I asked. There was a pause long enough to make my skin prickle. "The recipient name matches you," he said, "but the account information does not match what we have on file for you." That sentence turned my kitchen into a different place. The same table. The same curtains. But suddenly it felt like I was sitting inside a crime. Somebody had made an account using my name, an account I'd never opened. And only one person had access close enough to do that without Mark noticing. I slept with my notebook under my pillow that night like a child hiding a flashlight. In the morning I called my old friend Denise Harper, retired now but sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who reads contracts for fun. She listened, then said, "June, you need proof you can hold in your hand." Within a week, Trevor agreed to meet me off-site, not at the company, for discretion, he said. We sat in a diner where the coffee tasted like it had been reheated since last winter. He slid a folder across the table. My heart slammed once, hard. Inside were transfer confirmations, 8 of them, each for $5,000. Sender, Mark. Recipient, an account labeled June Holloway Household. The signature authorization at the bottom belonged to Mark, but the secondary signer, added later, was Paige. Trevor's voice stayed low. That account was opened online. The identity documents uploaded were copies. Copies of what? I asked, though I already knew. He didn't want to say it, but he did. Your driver's license. Your name. Your address. I felt humiliation before I felt anger. Because it wasn't only money. It was my identity, worn like a costume so she could take what she wanted. And while I'd been wearing cheap sweaters and praying the furnace held, Paige had been wearing my name like perfume. I asked Trevor, "If this goes to court, will you testify?" He swallowed. "If subpoenaed, yes. And June, you should know there are also unusual charges on the company card assigned to Paige. Spas. Boutique hotels. A designer handbag store I'd only seen on television. A down payment for that white SUV. The total made my stomach roll, because it wasn't only stealing from me, it was draining my sun while calling it love. I went home and stood in front of my hallway mirror. My hair was silver and my eyes looked tired, but they weren't dull. I said to my reflection, "You are not invisible. Age does not erase your right to be respected." Then I did something that would have shocked the younger version of me. I invited them to dinner. Mark and Paige. Sunday at 6. I told Mark I missed him. That was true. I also told him I wanted to go over something important. That was truer. All day Sunday I cooked like I was preparing for the past to walk back through my door. Pot roast, green beans cooked with onions, and Mark's favorite, banana pudding with vanilla wafers. I set the table with the good plates I only used at Christmas. If you're going to reveal a hard truth, it helps to do it under warm light. They arrived right on time. Mark looked exhausted. Paige looked flawless. Isn't it strange how exhaustion makes honest people look older, but lies keep some people polished? We ate. We talked about small things. I let Paige relax into her role. Then, while Mark was reaching for the salt, I said, I'm grateful for the monthly help, Mark. Remind me, what day is the transfer scheduled? Paige answered too quickly, like a reflex. The 10th, she said. Mark blinked. No, he said slowly. It's the 14th. I chose it because it falls after my investor meetings. Paige's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The air didn't freeze, it tightened. And Mark's eyes shifted, not to me, but to her, like a curtain moving in a draft. Have you ever watched a person realize, in real time, that the story they believed has holes? Paige laughed, thin. I meant around then. I nodded, gentle as a grandmother reading a bedtime story. Of course, I said. Then we'll check together next week. I'll come with you to the bank. She barely touched dessert. She kept checking her phone. Mark hugged me goodbye, but his arms were stiff, his mind somewhere else. Paige kissed my cheek again, still without warmth, and whispered, You're making trouble. After their car disappeared, I turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark a moment, listening to the old clock tick. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like I'd just taken my first full breath in months. The next step was the hardest. I asked Pastor Ellison if he would host a family giving meeting at the church hall, something that sounded harmless. Mark respects the church. Paige likes audiences. That combination mattered. On the night of the meeting, the fellowship hall smelled like coffee and folding chairs. I placed one thick envelope in the center of the table. Mark arrived first, confused but willing. Paige arrived second, irritated but smiling. Then Trevor walked in, tie straight, folder under his arm. Paige's smile finally cracked. Mark stood. Why is Trevor here? I said, softly, because I need you to hear facts from someone you'll trust. Trevor laid out the transfer sheets, the account opening record, and the list of charges. Mark stared at the pages as if they were written in a language he'd invented but never wanted to read. Paige started to cry, immediate and dramatic, tears spilling like a faucet turned on for show. She reached for Mark. I was going to pay it back, she sobbed. I was managing things. I leaned forward. Managing is when both people know, I said. This was hiding. Mark's voice broke. You told me my mother was forgetting. Paige's crying turned sharp. Because she is. Look at her. And that's when I placed my notebook on the table, dates, times, her exact lines, every visit recorded. My handwriting shook in places, but it didn't lie. Pastor Ellison didn't raise his voice. He only said, a family can survive many storms. But it cannot survive contempt. Paige stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. Fine, she snapped, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Believe her. Enjoy your tiny life. Then she walked out, heels loud against the tile, and the room felt suddenly quieter than it should have. Mark sat down like his bones had turned to wet sand. He didn't chase her. He didn't defend her. He just stared at my notebook, then at me, like he was seeing me for the first time in a long while. Mom, he whispered, why didn't you tell me sooner? I reached across the table and held his hand. Because I wanted you to wake up without hating yourself, I said. And because I needed proof, not guesses. Denise filed the paperwork the next morning. Fraud. Exploitation of an older adult. Identity misuse. The words looked harsh on paper, but sometimes harsh words are the only ones that fit. Court day came with gray skies. Paige arrived in a severe suit, trying to look small and wronged. Mark sat behind her, alone, eyes hollow. When her lawyer suggested I was confused, something hot rose in my chest, then settled into steel. Denise stood and said, this woman kept an accurate log for 8 months. It matches the financial trail exactly. Trevor confirmed the account creation process and the transaction chain. The judge's expression didn't soften. It sharpened. The ruling was simple. Paige was ordered to repay the full amount, plus fees, and barred from controlling any of Mark's accounts. Paige's face drained of color, but Mark didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, like he was counting all the days he'd missed the truth. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall. I lifted my face into it for 1 second. Not because I enjoyed the cold, but because it reminded me I could still feel. Justice doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it tastes like iron and water. Mark didn't call for months. I repaired my roof. I replaced my furnace. I bought groceries without calculating each item like a math problem. And still, some nights I set an extra cup on the counter without thinking, then put it back when I realized I was alone. With what remained, I started something small at St. Bridget's, a weekly help desk for seniors who needed someone to read their statements, check their accounts, and explain the fine print their families hoped they'd ignore. I called it the kitchen table ledger, because that's where most betrayals start, and where many healings can too. People came with trembling hands and plastic folders. A man whose grandson had borrowed his pension. A woman whose daughter had taken out loans in her name. I listened, and I told them, you are allowed to protect yourself. Then one night in late October, wind threw rain against my windows like handfuls of gravel. I was folding towels when I heard a knock, slow, unsure. I opened the door, and there was Mark, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red. He didn't step inside like a businessman. He stepped in like a boy who'd gotten lost. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "I'm sorry." Then he sank down onto my entryway rug, shoulders shaking, and I felt my heart split and mend at the same time. I sat beside him on the floor. "Get up," I told him gently. "You don't have to kneel to love your mother." He stared at his hands. "I let her talk me into thinking you were fading." I lifted his chin like I used to when he scraped his knee. "You made a mistake," I said. "But you came back. That matters." He told me Paige had emptied what she could before the court order hit, then disappeared. "She left a message," he said. "She said I deserved it for trusting the wrong person." I exhaled, slow. "No," I said. "You deserved better for trusting at all." We sat by my living room lamp, listening to the storm calm down. Mark looked around my small house, my old photos, my chipped teacups, and he whispered, "I forgot where I came from." I squeezed his hand. "Then remember," I said. "And do something good with what you know now." The next Saturday, he came with me to St. Bridget's. He carried boxes. He made coffee. He apologized to no one in particular, which is how you can tell a regret is real. Watching him sit with an older gentleman and explain how to set up account alerts, I felt something inside me loosen. Here's the truth I wish I'd learned earlier: family love is not permission to be careless. It's a responsibility to pay attention. Would you want someone you love to learn that lesson the hard way? Months passed. The repayments came in installments. Mark rebuilt his life one honest day at a time. My little ledger desk at church became 2 tables, then 3, and Pastor Ellison found a grant that helped us buy a printer and a lockbox. One quiet evening, Mark and I sat on my porch watching the neighborhood lights blink on. He said, "Mom, I thought providing money was the same as showing up." I looked at him, and I didn't scold. "Providing helps," I said. "But showing up is what keeps someone from being alone inside their own life." Before you go, let me tell you what I wrote on the last page of that notebook. I wrote, "I am not a target." And I wrote, "I will not be shamed for aging." If this story held your attention because it touched something tender in you, please press like, and consider subscribing to Dust of Old Days. It helps these quiet stories find the people who need them. And if you're caring for an older parent, or you are the older parent, promise me one thing: keep your eyes open, even when love makes you want to close them. Because dignity is not something you earn once. It's something you defend, gently, for the rest of your days.